The sun was just rising above the quiet houses, painting the sky in soft colors of pink and orange. It was an ordinary morning on Oak Street, where the families followed the same routine every day. Parents rushed to prepare breakfast, children looked for their school bags, and neighbors waved to each other while standing near their cars. The calm rhythm of the street was almost comforting, as if nothing unusual could ever happen there. Mr. Harris drove slowly in his big green garbage truck. He had been working as a garbage man for many years and knew almost every face in the neighborhood. Some children liked to wave at him, and sometimes he waved back with a smile. He was not just doing his job, he had become part of the community in his own quiet way. Every week, he stopped at the same spots, picked up the same bins, and greeted the same families. This morning, however, something felt different. As he pulled up near the Johnsons' house, he heard the sound of a door opening suddenly. At first, he thought someone was just bringing out a bin late, but what he saw next made him freeze for a second. A small boy, barefoot and dressed in wrinkled pajamas, ran out of the front door. His face was wet with tears, and his tiny chest moved fast as he tried to catch his breath. The boy looked terrified, not like a child who had tripped or hurt his knee, but like someone who had seen something that shook his whole world. Mr. Harris quickly parked the truck and jumped down. His boots landed hard on the ground, but he ignored the sound and rushed toward the child. "Hey, buddy, what's wrong?" he asked softly, bending down so his face was level with the boy's. The little boy looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes. For a moment, he struggled to find his words. His lips trembled, and his small hands clutched the front of his shirt tightly as if holding onto it could keep him safe. The boy finally managed to speak, though his words came out broken and shaky. There's a man in my house," he stammered. "Mom's inside. I ran out." His voice cracked, and fresh tears rolled down his cheeks. Mr. Harris felt a cold chill run through his body. He was used to seeing kids cry over scraped knees or broken toys, but this was different. The fear in the boy's voice was real, the kind that could not be faked. He placed a gentle hand on the child's shoulder and said calmly, "It's okay, you're safe with me now. Don't go back inside." The boy clung to him, as if he was afraid that if he let go, the danger would return. Mr. Harris looked at the house. The curtains were drawn, and nothing seemed out of place from the outside, but he trusted the boy's words. Children didn't cry like that unless something serious was happening. He pulled out his phone with his free hand and quickly dialed 911. His voice, though steady, carried urgency. "This is Oak Street, near the corner by the park," he told the dispatcher. "A little boy just ran out of his house crying. He says someone is inside, and his mom is still in there. We need help right away." The dispatcher assured him that officers were on their way. Mr. Harris hung up and crouched lower to meet the boy's eyes again. "Listen to me," he said softly, "the police are coming. They will help your mom. You're very brave for coming out and telling me." The boy sniffled and nodded, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. He kept glancing nervously toward the house as if expecting the door to burst open at any second. Mr. Harris shifted slightly so he stood between the child and the front door. He wanted the boy to feel protected, even though inside, his own heart was beating faster than usual. Across the street, a neighbor noticed the scene. Mrs. Green, an elderly woman who liked to water her plants every morning, frowned and called out, "Is everything okay?" Mr. Harris raised his hand firmly and shook his head. "Stay inside, please," he said loudly. His tone was polite but clear. He didn't want anyone else wandering over and making the situation more dangerous. More neighbors started peeking through their windows. Curious eyes watched as the garbage man knelt beside the crying boy. Some whispered to each other, wondering what could be going on. The quiet street that usually echoed with the sound of birds was now filled with tension. Minutes passed, though they felt much longer. The boy pressed closer to Mr. Harris and whispered again, "She's still in there." His voice carried so much pain that Mr. Harris almost wished he could rush inside himself, but he knew that would be reckless. He wasn't trained for that. All he could do was keep the boy safe until the professionals arrived. Then, in the distance, the faint sound of sirens broke the silence. The boy's head lifted slightly, his eyes hopeful for the first time since he had run out of the house. Mr. Harris gave him a small smile. "Hear that? They're coming. Everything's going to be okay," he said gently. The sound grew louder, and soon flashing lights appeared at the end of the street. Police cars came racing toward them, their presence strong and commanding. Neighbors stepped back, some even closing their curtains as the vehicles stopped in front of the Johnsons' house. Officers jumped out, moving quickly but carefully. One officer crouched down in front of the boy, just like Mr. Harris had done earlier. "Can you tell me what you saw?" he asked softly. The boy, still holding tightly to Mr. Harris's sleeve, pointed toward his house with a trembling finger. His voice was small but clear this time, "A man. I saw a man. He's still inside. Mom's with him." That was all the officer needed. He looked up at his team, gave a quick signal, and immediately called for backup through his radio. The calm suburban street was no longer just a peaceful neighborhood. It was now the center of something dangerous and urgent. Mr. Harris gently patted the boy's shoulder. "You did the right thing," he whispered. He knew this was just the beginning, and that the quiet morning had turned into a day no one on Oak Street would ever forget. The police cars had just stopped, and the quiet street was no longer calm. Red and blue lights flashed across the houses, bouncing off windows and making the whole neighborhood look like it was caught in a strange glow. Mr. Harris stayed close to the little boy, who was still holding his sleeve tightly. The boy's eyes were fixed on his house, and his lips moved as if he was silently calling for his mother. The officers quickly spread out. Two of them guided neighbors back into their homes. They didn't want people standing on lawns or sidewalks, making the situation worse. A few curious neighbors tried to step out to ask questions, but the officers raised their hands firmly and told them to stay inside. Doors closed one by one, though people still watched through cracks in curtains. One of the officers leaned closer to the boy and asked again, "Can you tell me what you saw?" The boy swallowed hard and repeated in a trembling voice, "There's a man inside. Mom is still in there." He broke in. His words were simple, but they carried a heavy weight. The officer nodded, then signaled to the others. Mr. Harris felt the boy's hand grip tighter. He lowered his voice and said, "You're safe here. Don't worry, they're going to help your mom." The boy nodded slowly, but tears still ran down his cheeks. A sergeant, tall and serious, arrived with another group of officers. He quickly assessed the situation and gave instructions. Some officers moved behind cars for cover. Others carefully approached the house to check for signs of forced entry. Within minutes, one officer spoke through his radio, "Back door looks broken. Movement inside confirmed." The words made everyone tense. Mr. Harris could feel the little boy's body shake slightly against him. The officers wasted no time. The sergeant ordered more units, and soon another car pulled up with additional backup. The street was being sealed off quickly. Yellow tape stretched across one end, while patrol cars blocked the other. A woman in her nightgown from across the street tried to ask what was happening, but an officer gently pushed her back toward her porch. "Please go inside. It's not safe out here." She hesitated, then obeyed. The air was growing heavier with each passing second. The boy kept whispering, "She's inside, she's inside." Mr. Harris crouched again so he could look the boy in the eye. "I know, buddy. But listen, your mom is strong, and these officers are trained to handle this. You did the bravest thing by coming out. Now let them do the rest." The boy wiped his nose with his sleeve and nodded, though his small shoulders still trembled. Mr. Harris stayed with him, almost like a shield between the child and the house. The sergeant walked over to them. "Thank you for staying with him," he said to Mr. Harris. Then he turned to the boy. "Son, can you tell us if you saw what the man looked like? Was he someone you knew?" The boy shook his head quickly. "No. I never saw him before. He was tall. He was scary. He had something in his hand." The sergeant didn't press further. That was enough for now. More officers arrived, carrying protective gear and communication devices. One of them placed a hand gently on the boy's shoulder. "We're going to get your mom out," he promised. The boy looked up, his eyes wide. "Really?" The officer nodded firmly. "Really? That's why we're here." As they spoke, the rest of the team was already taking positions. One officer used binoculars to look through a side window. He quickly whispered to the sergeant, "Movement inside. Someone is pacing. Can't see the woman, but she might be in the living room." The sergeant clenched his jaw and ordered everyone to stay ready. The street felt like it was holding its breath. Neighbors peered nervously from their windows, some whispering prayers. Dogs barked faintly from backyards, picking up the unusual tension in the air. The garbage truck still sat in the middle of the road, forgotten, like a silent witness to everything. The boy tugged at Mr. Harris's sleeve again. "Why aren't they going in now?" he asked in a worried tone. Mr. Harris looked at him gently. "They have to be careful. They don't want to scare the man and make things worse. They'll wait for the right moment." The boy bit his lip but said nothing more. The officers prepared themselves with quiet precision. Shields, radios, weapons, all ready. A loudspeaker was set up at a safe distance. One of the officers picked it up and called out firmly, "This is the police. We know you are inside. Come out with your hands up." The words echoed down the street. The boy's eyes widened, and he pressed himself against Mr. Harris. The garbage man kept his arm around the boy's shoulders, steadying him. The house, however, remained silent. The officer repeated the call. "This is the police. Step outside now." Still nothing. The silence grew heavier. Mr. Harris could feel the boy's heartbeat racing, even though he wasn't holding him tightly. He bent his head slightly and whispered, "It's okay. They're doing their job." Suddenly, there was movement. A curtain shifted slightly. An officer whispered into his radio, "We have visual. Someone's near the front window." The tension rose instantly. Every officer tightened their stance, waiting for what would happen next. But the figure didn't step out. The curtain closed again, and the house went still. The sergeant ordered his men to hold their positions. He didn't want anyone rushing in recklessly. The boy whimpered softly. Mr. Harris rubbed his back gently, trying to calm him down. "You're very brave," he whispered. "Not many kids could do what you did." The boy didn't reply, but he leaned into the comfort of those words. The sound of more sirens in the distance grew louder. Another unit was arriving. The street was now fully blocked off, turning what had once been a peaceful morning into a scene of urgency. Helicopters hadn't arrived yet, but some neighbors were already calling relatives, telling them about the lockdown. The entire block knew something serious was unfolding. The sergeant gave another command through the loudspeaker, warning the men inside again. Still no answer. This silence only made the situation scarier. Every second that passed felt like the calm before a storm. Mr. Harris stayed rooted in place, still holding onto the boy, even though his own legs were beginning to ache. He couldn't imagine leaving the child alone, not until this nightmare ended. The boy's tiny voice broke the silence once more as he asked the question that haunted everyone, "Is she going to be okay?" Mr. Harris tightened his grip gently, his voice calm and steady. "Yes. They're going to make sure she's okay. Even as he said the words, he silently hoped with all his heart that they would be true. The whole street had fallen into a strange silence, the kind that made even the sound of a bird feel too loud. The flashing lights from the police cars reflected off the windows, casting moving colors over the neat houses. Families stayed hidden behind their curtains, afraid to step outside. Some clutched their children close, whispering prayers under their breath. The normal rhythm of Oak Street had been replaced by fear, and everyone was waiting for what would happen next. Mr. Harris stood beside the garbage truck with the little boy pressed close to him. The child hadn't let go of his sleeve since the moment he had run out of the house. His small fingers gripped tightly, and his eyes never left the front door. He looked both scared and hopeful at the same time, as if staring at the house long enough might somehow bring his mother out. Police officers remained spread out around the house, their movements quiet and sharp. A few crouched behind cars, others took cover near fences, and one officer kept his binoculars fixed on the windows. The sergeant stood near the loudspeaker, his face calm but serious. Everyone was waiting for a sign, something that could guide the next move. The boy trembled and whispered again, "She's still in there." His voice was soft, but it broke the heavy silence. Mr. Harris leaned down slightly. "I know," he said gently. "They see what's happening. They'll get her out." He kept rubbing the boy's back, hoping his words could ease the fear in his heart. Through the binoculars, one officer spotted movement. He raised his hand and gave a quiet signal. "Shadow moving in the hallway," he reported softly through his radio. The words made the entire team alert. Guns shifted slightly, eyes narrowed, and bodies stiffened. But the figure inside didn't come to the window again. It seemed to pace back and forth, almost restless. The sergeant lifted the loudspeaker once more. His voice was firm, echoing through the still air. "This is the police. We know you are inside. Come out peacefully, and no one will get hurt." For a moment, the house remained still. Then, from inside, a faint sound echoed, something like footsteps. The boy gasped and clung tighter to Mr. Harris. The garbage man lowered his voice and whispered, "Stay calm. They're here for you and your mom." Another officer carefully moved to the side of the house, trying to peer in through a small gap in the curtains. He froze and quickly ducked back down, whispering to his radio, "I see the woman. She's alive. She's tied up in the living room." Those words were both a relief and a new worry. The boy's mother was still alive, but she was clearly in danger. Mr. Harris felt the child's body tremble harder, and he quickly spoke with gentle strength. "You hear that? She's alive. That means they'll save her. Hold on to that, okay?" The boy nodded weakly, wiping his tears on his sleeve. The officers adjusted their positions again. Some got closer, shields in place, while others kept their eyes on the windows. The sergeant gave another order into the loudspeaker, demanding the man come out. Still, there was no clear response. The tension grew heavier, as if the air itself was pressing down on everyone. Neighbors dared not move. The street was locked down, and everyone knew this was no ordinary disturbance. Even the dogs had gone quiet, sensing the fear in their owners' voices. The only sounds were the faint static from police radios and the occasional sniffle from the boy who stood with Mr. Harris. Minutes felt like hours. Every second stretched long. Mr. Harris tried to keep the boy distracted by asking small questions. "What's your name?" he whispered. The boy answered softly, "Ethan." Mr. Harris gave him a nod. "That's a strong name. You're being very brave right now, Ethan. Not every boy your age could do this." Ethan's lips trembled, but a tiny spark of pride flickered in his frightened eyes. Suddenly, movement at the front door made everyone stiffen. The knob turned slightly, and the door creaked. An officer shouted a warning, raising his hand. Guns were ready, but no one fired. A tall shadow appeared in the doorway, and a figure stepped forward. It wasn't the mother. It was a man. His face was partly hidden, his movements quick and uneasy. He seemed to hold something in his hand, though from a distance it was hard to tell what it was. Officers shouted commands all at once. Drop what's in your hand. Step outside with your hands where we can see them. The man hesitated. He shifted his weight, pacing just inside the doorway. His head jerked around as if he were deciding whether to run, fight, or give up. The boy buried his face into Mr. Harris's arm, not wanting to watch. Mr. Harris tightened his hold protectively. One of the officers whispered urgently into his radio, "The mother is still inside. I can see her in the corner. She's alive, but tied up." The sergeant's jaw tightened. This wasn't just a matter of removing an intruder, it was a rescue mission now. The man suddenly stepped back into the house, slamming the door shut. Officers raised their weapons higher, expecting the worst. The street went silent again, the tension even heavier now than before. The boy let out a soft cry, whispering, "He's still there with her." Mr. Harris whispered back, "Stay strong, Ethan. They won't leave her in there." The sergeant ordered his team to prepare for entry. Shields were raised, gear checked, radios buzzing with quick instructions. The moment was approaching when they might have to storm the house. Mr. Harris held Ethan close, shielding his view from the sharp movements of the officers. "Stay with me," Mr. Harris whispered. "Keep looking at me, not at the house." But Ethan shook his head. "I want to see her," he whispered stubbornly, tears still in his eyes. The team prepared themselves. A battering ram was brought to the front. Officers lined up, ready to breach at the signal. The sergeant lifted his hand and counted down silently. The entire street seemed to hold its breath. At that moment, the garbage man realized how extraordinary the morning had become. Just an hour earlier, he was lifting bins and waving at neighbors. Now he was holding onto a frightened child while police prepared to storm a house. Life had turned upside down in the blink of an eye. As the officers got into position, one last call echoed through the loudspeaker, "This is the police. Last warning. Come out now with your hands up." The house remained silent, but everyone knew the next few minutes would decide everything. Mr. Harris bent close to Ethan and said softly, "No matter what happens, you're safe. They're going to get your mom. Believe that?" Ethan nodded, clutching tightly to him, his small heart pounding fast. The tension was unbearable. Everyone knew what was coming next. The air on Oak Street was heavy, as if the whole neighborhood had stopped breathing. The officers were lined up, shields raised, eyes fixed on the Johnsons' house. Every movement was sharp and precise, like a scene carefully choreographed. The loudspeaker's last warning still echoed faintly in the air, but the house remained closed and silent. Ethan clung to Mr. Harris's sleeve, his small hands gripping tightly as if letting go would somehow make his mother disappear forever. His cheeks were damp with tears, and his lips pressed together, trembling. Mr. Harris bent slightly toward him and whispered, "Stay close. They're about to help her." The sergeant gave a quick hand signal, and suddenly the quiet street exploded into action. The officers at the front rushed forward, the heavy battering ram slamming against the door. The sound was loud and powerful, echoing off the houses around them. The door shook once, twice, then burst open with a crack that seemed to split the morning in half. Shouts filled the air. "Police! Drop everything! Hands up!" Their voices were strong and commanding, filling the house with authority. The team poured inside, their boots thudding against the floor, shields up, weapons steady. Ethan buried his face into Mr. Harris's arm, not wanting to see or hear the noise. The garbage man wrapped an arm around him, shielding him from the chaos. Neighbors across the street peeked nervously through curtains, some gasping, others whispering prayers. The flashing lights painted their worried faces with red and blue streaks. Inside the house, muffled shouting continued. The officer's commands were firm and quick. There was the sound of something falling, a loud thud, and then silence. Seconds stretched painfully long, and everyone outside waited, frozen, for what would happen next. Suddenly, a voice came through an officer's radio: "Suspect in custody. Woman secured." Relief washed over the street like a wave breaking on the shore. Officers began stepping out, their movements calmer now. One officer emerged first, holding the suspect in handcuffs. The man's face was tense, his head lowered, but his struggle was useless against the firm grip of the officers who surrounded him. Gasps rose from the neighbors who saw him, but the police quickly guided him toward a squad car, pushing him inside and locking the door. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Another officer stepped out of the house, carefully guiding Ethan's mother. Her hair was messy, her steps unsteady, and her face pale, but her eyes searched the crowd desperately. The instant Ethan saw her, he broke free from Mr. Harris and ran forward, his little legs moving as fast as they could. "Mom," he cried, his voice breaking with relief. She dropped to her knees as soon as he reached her, wrapping her arms tightly around him. Tears streamed down her face, but this time they were tears of gratitude. She held him close, kissing the top of his head again and again. Ethan buried his face into her shoulder, sobbing, but his cries carried a different sound now. They were cries of release, of finding safety after fear. The crowd of neighbors, those still behind the tape, clapped softly. Some smiled with tears in their eyes. Others held their children closer, feeling the weight of what could have happened but didn't. The street, moments ago filled with tension, now echoed with sighs of relief. Mr. Harris stood back, watching the reunion with a quiet smile. His heart felt lighter. He had been the one the boy had run to, the one who called for help. But he didn't step forward for thanks. He stayed near his truck, giving the family their space. The sergeant walked over to him. "You did the right thing today," he said firmly. "That boy trusted you, and because of you, we got here in time." Mr. Harris nodded humbly. "Anyone would have done the same," he replied softly. But the sergeant shook his head. "Not everyone. Some people freeze. You acted." Ethan and his mother continued to cling to each other, as if afraid they would be separated again. Officers gave them water and checked her condition. She looked shaken but strong enough to stand, strong enough to hold her son and whisper promises that she would never let him face such fear again. The suspect sat in the squad car, silent and still. His presence no longer mattered to the street. The only thing people cared about was that the mother and child were safe. The flashing lights began to dim as some police cars prepared to leave. The lockdown was being lifted slowly, and neighbors cautiously stepped outside. They spoke in hushed voices, some approaching Mr. Harris to thank him quietly. An older woman placed her hand on his shoulder and said, "If that boy hadn't run to you, who knows what would have happened?" Mr. Harris gave a polite nod, still modest. "He was the brave one," he said, pointing toward Ethan. "I just answered when he called." Ethan, still hugging his mother, glanced back at Mr. Harris. His tear-stained face lit up for just a moment, and he gave a small, grateful smile. Mr. Harris smiled back and lifted a hand in a gentle wave. As the sun rose higher, the normal sounds of the street began to return. A dog barked from a backyard. A car door closed in the distance. But Oak Street would never feel quite the same. The memory of this morning, the fear, the bravery, and the relief would stay with everyone. The garbage truck was still parked in the middle of the road, forgotten during all the chaos. Mr. Harris walked slowly toward it, his steps steady, though his heart still raced. He climbed back into the cab, glancing once more at Ethan and his mother. They were sitting on the curb now, surrounded by officers who spoke to them gently. Mr. Harris started the engine, the familiar rumble breaking the silence. For a moment, he thought about how strange life could be. He had woken up that morning expecting nothing more than a routine day of collecting bins. Instead, he had become part of a story that the neighborhood would talk about for years. He drove the truck forward slowly, his eyes catching one last glimpse of the boy. Ethan lifted his hand and waved. It wasn't the nervous wave of a child hiding behind fear, it was the grateful wave of someone who had been saved. Mr. Harris waved back, his chest warming with quiet pride. The police finished their work, the tape came down, and the street returned to its familiar rhythm. But deep down, everyone who lived there knew they had witnessed something unforgettable. A little boy's courage, a garbage man's quick action, and the determination of the police had turned a terrifying morning into a story of hope and survival. And as Mr. Harris continued on his route, the neighborhood watched him go, not just as the man who collected their garbage, but as someone who had stood strong when it mattered most. The flashing lights eventually faded as some of the patrol cars drove away. The yellow tape came down, and Oak Street slowly returned to a calmer rhythm. Yet, nothing felt truly normal. The morning that had begun with quiet routines and coffee cups had turned into a memory that none of the neighbors would forget. People stood in small groups on their porches, speaking in hushed voices, shaking their heads in disbelief, and watching as the last officers finished their work. Ethan sat beside his mother on the curb near their house. His small body was still pressed against her side as though he feared letting go. She wrapped her arm around him tightly, kissing his forehead every few minutes, almost to remind herself he was really there. Her eyes still carried the shock of what had happened, but her face softened each time she looked at her son. Mr. Harris stayed close but didn't want to intrude. He stood near his truck, watching quietly. He felt both tired and relieved, his body still buzzing from the weight of everything that had unfolded. When he had first seen Ethan running barefoot and crying, he hadn't known what to expect. Now, hours later, he was grateful that the boy had found the courage to run to him and that he had made the choice to act without hesitation. The sergeant walked over to Ethan and his mother, kneeling to speak with them gently. His voice was calm, the kind of tone meant to reassure. "You're safe now," he told her. "The man is in custody. He won't be coming back." Ethan's mother nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. She thanked the officers softly, her voice trembling with both gratitude and exhaustion. Neighbors began approaching carefully, their faces filled with sympathy. Some carried water bottles, others offered blankets, and a few simply stood nearby, ready to give words of comfort. It was as if the entire community had come together, realizing how fragile safety could feel and how important it was to stand with one another. Mrs. Green, the elderly neighbor who had first stepped out earlier in the morning, placed her hand over her heart and said, "We are so glad you and Ethan are safe. You're not alone, we're all here for you." Ethan's mother smiled faintly, grateful for the kindness. Ethan glanced toward Mr. Harris. His eyes, though still tired from crying, lit up with recognition. He whispered something to his mother, and she nodded. Together, they stood and slowly walked over to where Mr. Harris was standing. The boy's small voice broke the silence. "Thank you," he said, his tone filled with sincerity far beyond his years. His mother echoed his words, her voice steadier now. "You saved us. If you hadn't been here, I don't know what would have happened." Mr. Harris shook his head gently, humbled. "He saved you," he said, pointing to Ethan. "He was the one brave enough to run out and ask for help. I only listened." But Ethan shook his head quickly, his voice firm though still soft. "I ran because I saw you. I knew you would help." Those words hit Mr. Harris deeply, and he felt his chest tighten with quiet emotion. He had always done his job without seeking attention, but to hear that a child had trusted him so completely was something he would never forget. The sergeant joined them, nodding firmly at Mr. Harris. "He's right," he said. You were the link between fear and safety. You didn't waste a second, and because of that, lives were saved today. As the hours passed, reporters began arriving. Word had spread quickly, and cameras appeared at the edge of the street. The police kept them at a distance, but the story was already alive, carried on whispered phone calls and social media posts from curious neighbors. Some people pointed toward the garbage truck, telling reporters about how the boy had run straight to the garbage man and how his quick call had changed everything. Mr. Harris felt uncomfortable with the attention. He never wanted the spotlight. He returned to his truck, checking his route sheet as if reminding himself of the ordinary tasks he still had to finish. To him, it wasn't about being a hero, it was about doing what was right. But for Ethan, the image of the garbage man would never again be ordinary. Each week, when he saw the truck rolling down Oak Street, he would no longer see just a worker doing his job. He would see the man who protected him when he was most afraid, the man who called for help when he couldn't. The next morning, Oak Street looked almost normal again. Bins were neatly lined up, children waited for the school bus, and cars left for work. But beneath the calm surface, there was a new bond among the neighbors. People greeted each other with warmer smiles, waved more often, and checked in on Ethan's family to make sure they were okay. The memory of the lockdown and rescue had reminded them all how important it was to care for one another. Ethan's mother placed a small sign on her front window that simply said, "Thank you, Oak Street." It was a gesture to the community, but most of all, to the man who had stopped his truck and listened to a frightened little boy. Later that week, when Mr. Harris returned on his regular route, Ethan was waiting on the curb. This time he wasn't crying. He stood barefoot again, but his face carried a smile. As the truck approached, he waved excitedly. Mr. Harris stopped and climbed down, and Ethan ran forward. Without hesitation, he wrapped his arms around the man's waist in a hug. "You're my hero," Ethan whispered. Mr. Harris knelt down, his eyes soft, and replied, "You're mine. You were braver than most adults could ever be." Neighbors clapped from their porches, touched by the simple but powerful moment. It was a reminder that true heroes don't always wear uniforms or stand on stages. Sometimes they are people who show up quietly, do their work humbly, and choose to act when the moment demands it. From that day on, whenever the garbage truck rolled into Oak Street, it was greeted with more than just casual waves. Children waved with excitement, parents nodded with respect, and neighbors smiled with gratitude. And every time Ethan saw the truck, he would run out, not in fear, but in joy, because to him, the garbage man was no longer just someone who collected bins. He was a protector, a friend, and the reason his mother had survived that morning. The story of Oak Street spread beyond the neighborhood. It appeared in newspapers and local television. Headlines spoke of the garbage man hero and the brave boy who saved his mother. Yet, for Mr. Harris, the praise mattered less than the quiet smile of a little boy who knew he was safe. Life eventually returned to its steady rhythm, but one thing was certain. Neither Ethan, his mother, nor anyone on Oak Street would ever forget that morning. They would remember the flashing lights, the tense silence, and the moment when courage and compassion turned fear into hope. And for Mr. Harris, every time he climbed into his truck and started the engine, he carried with him the knowledge that sometimes ordinary people, in ordinary jobs, are given extraordinary chances to make a difference.